Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're tackling a concept that's really crucial for anyone interested in Marxism.
Right.
Especially young comrades from Tamilnadu aiming to build a socialist society.
Yeah.
We're diving into revisionism, what it is, its historical impact, and why it's a challenge you need to understand.
Revisionism is a tricky beast.
Oh.
Imagine you have a blueprint for building a house, but someone keeps suggesting improvements that subtly change the design.
Okay.
Eventually, you might end up with something that doesn't look anything like the house you planned.
I see what you mean. So it's about these seemingly small changes
Exactly.
that can lead to big departures from the original idea.
Yes.
And why is this so important for us in Tamilnadu?
Because these improvements often come disguised as progress or adapting to the times.
Right.
But they can actually dilute the revolutionary essence of Marxism, leading to compromises with the very systems we're trying to change.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's not just about studying theory. It's about being aware of how those ideas can be misinterpreted or even manipulated.
Absolutely.
You know, when I hear the word revisionism, I immediately think of Lenin. Didn't he have a lot to say about this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lenin was one of the most vocal critics of revisionism.
Okay.
He saw it as a direct threat to the heart of Marxist theory and the struggle for socialism.
And we have his work right here.
Okay.
So, Kleiderpunkt
Yes.
a classic text that breaks down revisionism. Even the introduction, starting from page 3, shows how seriously Lenin took this threat.
What's striking is how Lenin identified the danger of revisionism coming from within the socialist movement itself.
Oh, wow.
He called out those who claimed to be Marxists but were subtly distorting the theory.
Can you give us an example?
Sure.
Someone who Lenin considered a revisionist?
One prominent figure was Edward Bernstein,
Okay.
a leading member of the German Social Democratic Party in the late 1800s.
Okay, so Bernstein was a socialist.
Yes.
But Lenin considered him a revisionist.
Yes.
That seems a bit contradictory.
It is, and that's what makes revisionism so dangerous.
Right.
Bernstein didn't outright reject Marxism.
Okay.
Instead, he proposed reforms that he claimed would make it more realistic and achievable.
So what kind of reforms did he suggest?
For instance, Bernstein argued that instead of focusing on revolution, socialists should work within existing political systems to achieve gradual change through reforms.
Interesting. So instead of overthrowing the capitalist system, he thought socialists should try to improve it from within.
Exactly.
Oh.
He believed in achieving socialism through elections and parliamentary means, rather than through a revolutionary break.
I could see how that might appeal to some people.
Yes.
It seems less riskily radical.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's the danger of revisionism.
Okay.
It often presents itself as a more pragmatic, less disruptive path.
Right.
But for Lenin, this was a fundamental betrayal of Marxist principles.
So Lenin saw Bernstein's ideas as a step backward.
Yes.
The dilution of the revolutionary spirit of Marxism.
Exactly.
Okay.
Lenin believed that capitalism couldn't be reformed, it had to be abolished. He argued that Bernstein's approach would only serve to strengthen the existing power structures, ultimately hindering the path towards true socialism.
Now, how does this relate to us in Tamilnadu today? Why should we care about what some German socialist was saying over a century ago?
Because the challenges that Lenin identified are still relevant today.
Okay.
We see similar arguments being made even within progressive movements.
Can you give us an example?
Sure.
Something that might resonate with our listeners here.
Think about those who argue that we can achieve socialism through elections alone.
Okay.
Or that we should focus on social justice issues without challenging the underlying economic system.
Those sound like reasonable goals, though.
Yeah.
What's wrong with focusing on elections or social justice?
There's nothing inherently wrong with those things. But for Lenin, the problem with revisionism is that it detaches these goals from the ultimate aim of revolutionary transformation.
You mean it's about focusing on symptoms rather than addressing the root cause?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Lenin believed that real change, lasting change, requires a fundamental break with the capitalist system.
Okay.
And that requires more than just winning elections or advocating for social justice.
So it's about keeping our eyes on the prize, the ultimate goal of building a socialist society, and being wary of approaches that might distract us from that goal.
Exactly.
Okay.
We need to be mindful of how seemingly minor revisions to Marxist theory can have a significant impact on our strategies and ultimately on the success of our movement.
This is all very thought-provoking, and I'm sure our listeners are starting to grasp just how complex this issue of revisionism really is.
Yes.
But before we move on to other examples,
Okay.
I want to pause here and ask you what stands out to you so far about how Bernstein's ideas were seen as a form of revisionism.
What stands out to me is how Bernstein presented his ideas as an evolution of Marxism, a way to make it more modern and relevant to the changing times.
He made it sound like he was improving on Marx, not betraying him.
Exactly. And that's a common tactic used by revisionists. They try to co-opt the language of revolution while subtly shifting its meaning.
So it's not always about outright rejecting Marxism.
Right.
It can be about reinterpreting it in a way that makes it less threatening to the existing power structures.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important historical example, the Second International.
For our listeners who might not be familiar,
Sure.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what the Second International was?
The Second International was a global organization of socialist parties formed in 1889.
Okay.
It was a time of great hope and enthusiasm for the socialist movement.
So a lot of energy and momentum towards international worker solidarity.
Yes. Initially, there was a strong commitment to Marxist principles and the goal of revolutionary change. However, over time, divisions emerged within the International.
What kind of divisions?
Well, some parties, particularly those in more developed countries, began to prioritize electoral success and working within existing political systems. They became more focused on reforms and less on revolution.
Sounds like Bernstein's influence was spreading.
You could say that, and these divisions came to a head with the outbreak of World War I in 1914.
World War I, a defining moment in history.
Yes.
How did the Second International respond to the war?
Tragically, instead of uniting against the imperialist war, many socialist parties within the International ended up supporting their own nation's war efforts.
That seems like a complete contradiction of socialist principles. Weren't they supposed to be against war and imperialism?
They were, but the influence of revisionist thinking had weakened their commitment to international solidarity.
Okay.
They had become more focused on national interests and parliamentary gains.
So the Second International, which started with so much promise, ultimately fractured due to internal divisions and a watering down of revolutionary principles.
Yeah. That's one way to put it. It was a devastating blow to the socialist movement and a stark lesson in the dangers of revisionism.
It's like they lost sight of the bigger picture.
Right.
The need for a united front against capitalism.
Exactly. And this highlights another important point.
Okay.
Revisionism doesn't just weaken individual parties. It weakens the entire movement by creating divisions and undermining solidarity.
This is all quite heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It seems like revisionism is a constant threat.
It is.
Something that socialists need to be constantly vigilant against.
That's right. It's a subtle but persistent force that can manifest in different forms and contexts.
Okay, I think we've laid a good foundation for understanding the historical impact of revisionism. Now, I'm curious to hear more about how these ideas might be playing out in contemporary movements.
Well, as we discussed earlier, revisionism often involves picking and choosing elements of Marxism while ignoring the more challenging aspects.
Like that buffet Marxism you mentioned earlier.
Exactly, and this can be particularly seductive because it allows people to identify with the language of revolution without fully committing to its demands.
Can you give us a concrete example of this, something relevant to our listeners in Tamilnadu?
Think about movements that focus solely on identity politics and representation without addressing the underlying economic structures of oppression.
So fighting for equality within the existing system rather than challenging the system itself.
Yes, while issues of identity and representation are important, they can become a distraction if they're not connected to a broader critique of capitalism.
You're saying that we need to be careful not to lose sight of the economic roots of oppression, even as we fight for social justice.
Precisely.
Okay.
Revisionism can manifest in many ways, but one common thread is a tendency to downplay the centrality of class struggle and the need for revolutionary transformation.
I see what you mean. It's like focusing on rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic instead of addressing the fact that the ship is sinking.
That's a powerful analogy, and it highlights the importance of critically examining the movements we participate in, even those that claim to be progressive or revolutionary.
So how do we do that? How can we discern genuine revolutionary movements from those that have been influenced by revisionist thinking?
It requires a deep understanding of Marxist theory, a critical eye, and a willingness to engage in principled debate.
So it's not enough to just have good intentions.
Right.
We need to have the knowledge and the tools to analyze our own movements and strategies.
Exactly. We need to be asking ourselves tough questions.
Okay.
Are we truly challenging the capitalist system, or are we simply trying to make it more palatable? Or are we focused on radical transformation, or are we content with incremental reforms?
These are vital questions for anyone who wants to build a socialist society, not just in Tamilnadu, but anywhere in the world.
Indeed, the fight against revisionism is a global struggle, a constant battle of ideas that requires us to be both vigilant and informed.
This brings us to another figure. Lenin, considered a revisionist Karl Kautsky. What were his main points of departure from classical Marxism?
Kautsky was a leading figure in the Second International, someone who was initially seen as an orthodox Marxist. But Lenin became increasingly critical of his views, particularly on the role of the state and the path to revolution.
So Kautsky believed that the state could be used to transition to socialism.
He argued that a socialist society could be achieved through a gradual democratization of the state, even under bourgeois rule. He downplayed the necessity of a revolutionary break, of a decisive seizure of power by the working class.
That sounds like a very different approach to revolution than what Lenin was advocating for.
It was, for Lenin, Kautsky's ideas represented a dangerous form of revisionism because they essentially legitimized working within the existing system rather than challenging it at its core.
So Kautsky's approach might have delayed or even prevented the kind of radical transformation that Lenin believed was necessary for true socialism to emerge.
Precisely, and this highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of Marxist theory and being able to discern subtle but significant departures from its core principles.
Seems like revisionism can be like a chameleon, adapting its appearance to blend in with different contexts and movements.
That's a great analogy, and it underscores the need for constant vigilance and critical thinking. We can't simply accept any idea or strategy that claims to be Marxist at face value.
Right.
We need to examine it closely, test it against the fundamentals of Marxist theory, and be willing to challenge those who are distorting or diluting its message.
So it's not enough to just be passionate about social justice or economic equality. We need to be intellectually equipped to recognize and combat the various forms of revisionism that can creep into our movements.
Absolutely. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to have those difficult conversations about strategy and ideology.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've journeyed through history exploring the ideas of figures like Bernstein and Kautsky, and we've started to connect those historical lessons to contemporary challenges.
And we've seen how revisionism isn't just an abstract theoretical problem. It has real-world consequences shaping the course of movements and impacting the lives of millions.
But what I find inspiring is that we've also discussed concrete steps we can take to counteract revisionism. It's about deepening our understanding of Marxist theory, critically examining the movements we're part of, and engaging in principled debate with our comrades.
Yes, the fight against revisionism is an ongoing process, a collective responsibility that requires us to be both vigilant and proactive.
So for our listeners in Tamilnadu who are eager to build a more just and equitable society, what's the key takeaway from our deep dive today?
I would say this: never underestimate the power of ideas. Revisionism thrives on confusion, on the blurring of lines between revolutionary principles and reformist compromises.
It's about staying grounded in the core tenets of Marxism, understanding its historical development, and being able to apply its analytical tools to the challenges we face today.
Exactly. And remember, you are not alone in this struggle. Connect with your comrades, build strong organizations, and never stop learning and questioning. The future of socialism depends on it.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Marxism and revisionism. And remember, the struggle continues.
Onwards to revolution.
Yeah.